Welcome back to the Soccerwhos podcast YouTube channel. We're back, and I say we because I'm actually joined this time by Lachlan. How are you doing, mate?
I'm going well. I realized that this is YouTube, so we're not going to really be cutting between the two of us. I imagine that both of our faces are going to be on screen the whole time, so I really had to make sure in that first couple of seconds I was switched on. This might not even make the edit. I'm excited to preview the A-League season. I believe we're working through our table predictions.
That is exactly right, mate. And I have to say, welcome. You definitely do have a face for video content. So
Stop it. As someone who works in radio, the number of times you hear, "Oh, you've got a face for radio," as if it was an original joke, really, just please, no one ever say that ever again.
bit of a Debbie Downer.
Yeah, but it's just not funny.
Yeah.
Anyway,
It's been said. Right?
it has been said.
What hasn't been said though is our A-League predictions.
Wow, that was arguably one of the best segues I've ever heard in my life. Let's get right into this.
For sure. Well, I'm just going to dive in the deep end with who I've got in 12th, mate.
Okay, we'll work up.
Work the way up. You know,
I guess
leave it on a cliffhanger.
Yeah, maybe not a cliffhanger, because a
that's
cliffhanger
the wrong
would then
word.
be editing it and having a separate episode just to find out who the number one is. But I guess you don't want to say who your number one prediction is first. You want to go from the bottom up.
Yeah, CTR. If you know YouTube, you know what that means. Anyway, my team in 12th.
Yep.
The Newcastle Jets, mate.
Okay.
Yeah, I think they're going to have a difficult season. And the reason being, the big one, is I think they're going to really miss Daniel Pena. I think he's a big loss for them. I think the creativity he brings to that outfit, that side, it's going to be a huge missing factor because he was just a difference maker at the end of the day. He was their attacking outlet, as good as the Georgian Becker was up front. I think Pena really created most of the opportunities. And that large creative burden will now fall on my one to watch for the season for Newcastle, Reno Piscopo. He's a fine player, transfer from Wellington Phoenix. But I just feel like he's not as talented, I'd say, technically, as Pena. And while a very good player, I think him being the one sole creative outlet, I think is going to cause many issues unless we see someone like an Archie Goodwin take huge developmental strides and see him also shore up his injury history and have a more complete season.
I think I've done something a little bit different to you when looking at players to profile and players to highlight. I've tried to find fringe Socceroos or future Socceroos, maybe players that we've seen in the Joeys, maybe the Ollie Roos. For me, there are three players that stand out, at least within the Newcastle Jets side, as players to watch this season. And hopefully, for their sake, they'll have a big season. Angus Thurgate.
Oh, yeah.
We know what he can do in midfield. We've seen him alongside the likes of Pena. And he is really someone that I think this next World Cup cycle, we could be seeing a lot more of. Maybe it's time for Tom Rogic to be phased out of the national team and a player like Thurgate to come in and show what he can do. So
they're very different players, but
yes.
I think Angus Thurgate, he kind of gives you that box-to-box mentality that we haven't really got in the Socceroos. We've got a lot of good creative players like Irvine, like Hristich, and like Moy, but we don't really have that true box-to-box player. Irvine's tried to play it, but he's better as a more advanced 8. So an Angus Thurgate, I think, would be a great shout for that role.
Archie Goodwin, we profiled him on our podcast. If you haven't listened to that, then go do that.
Good plug.
I know. Archie Goodwin, he's a player, once again, that struggled a little bit with injury, and it's really getting to that point in his career where it's the make or break. If you get too many injuries when you're young and you're not able to then break out and become the superstar that we hope he can become. So I think for his sake, if he can stay injury-free this season and if he can really work his way into that side, racking up, I think 8 goals this season would be a big achievement for him. We might not see him get to that level, but I think that would be a goal that I would love to see him fulfill.
For sure. And we'll do something slightly different. So I'm going 12th and up, right? I want to hear your predictions. So for you, we'll dot the table as we go. Where do you think the Newcastle Jets are going to finish?
I think the Jets will finish in 11th.
Okay.
I don't think they'll have a successful season in the grand scheme of things. But players like Thurgate, like Archie Goodwin, even like Mark Natter, who's moved over from the Western Sydney Wanderers, I think the beauty of the A-League, and I guess it's any sort of league, is that there are players who have moved from teams that are slightly higher on the ladder to teams like the Jets or the team that I have in 12th, the Glory, who are looking to get more game time. And I think this could be a great opportunity for someone like Natter.
Well, on the note of Perth Glory, let's move over to 11th, because that's who I have, mate.
We've got Perth and Newcastle Jets in the hypothetical
relegation spots.
If we had Pro-Rel, that's a conversation for another day.
Yeah, I think for me, Perth Glory, I've gone above them because I think they're just exactly 1 year ahead of the journey that Newcastle are on. I think Newcastle, when you look at their team last year, you have a lot of players, like a lot of quality players moving on. And you look at the Perth team last year, it was very much a squad of boys. And then you have a couple of experienced players who struggled with injury. And when I look at Newcastle, they're facing a similar thing. You've got someone like Mikkel Tedzer, who's a good striker, but I mean, look at last season with Fornaroli by himself. Wasn't really all that impactful. And I think Perth Glory, they're 1 year ahead now. They've had their youngsters develop one more season. And also they've strengthened really well with players like Amini coming into the squad. And for my one to watch, the big player I'd say coming in, I think he's got bags of potential. And it's just a matter of, I think this season he has to put it together. It's Stephen Kolakowski.
Stephen Kolakowski?
Kolakowski. That's the one.
Yeah, because we all know his cousin, Stephen Kolakowski.
Baller.
He is a baller. Less potential, I would say, than Stephen Kolakowski. He is one of those players that I have to watch. I think moving from a side like Melbourne City, even the likes of Tilio, which we'll probably get to a little bit later, because I imagine they're slightly higher up your ladder, he's struggling to break through behind Matt Leckie, Andrew Naboo. We've seen him playing off the bench for City, but for someone like Kolakowski, realistically, he wasn't going to get the game time that he needs at this point in his career. So to see him make the move to Perth, I think that'll be a great move for him. And for his sake, he can show what he can do in a side that is probably going to struggle for goals, if I'm honest. They're going to struggle to really make a mark this season. I don't know really how they're going to go. Ruben Zadkovic has a big job ahead of him. They have recruited relatively well. I think that losing Daniel Sturridge will be a good thing for them in the long run.
Yeah.
As much as a Liverpool fan like me wanted to see Sturridge succeed, injuries, it just wasn't going to work. So for Kolakowski, I think it's a great move for him personally. Even for a player like Zach Duncan, who was at the Raw, had a couple of games where he broke out. I think it was under Darren Davies at that time. It was a bit of an interesting period in time for the Raw. He moved over to Denmark, to Aarhus, I believe that's how you say it. The same team as Mustafa Amini, and now they're both reunited at Perth Glory. So I think that'll be a big one for him. We know that he's a bit of an unknown quantity within the A-League, and I think that's what really intrigues me about a player like Zach Duncan, because he is that unknown quantity. Will we see lots of him? I don't know. He is young, and A-League managers, they tend to give emphasis to an older player, but I'd like to see him partner alongside Amini. The last player I have, and he's someone that can be utilised as a fullback or as a winger, Anthony Burke-Gilroy. Whether we'll ever see him for the Socceroos, I don't know. It's a bit of an interesting one.
He's the kind of player that you look at, I think, and you could say he could be an insane A-League player that makes some appearances at Socceroos, but he can also just become an all-right Australian fullback. He's got such variance in his potential.
Exactly. And we've seen glimpses of that potential last season. This will be really a season for him to make a mark in the A-League and to help just bump the needle for Perth Glory, to maybe shift them out of that second last spot or that last spot.
Yeah. So we've got our 12th and our 11th the same. Going on to 10th, I'll be really interested to see what you have here, because for me, this is when I started to have some trouble. I felt good about my 12. I felt good about my 11. I've gone for 10th Wellington Phoenix. Now, this was a hard choice for me because they're returning to New Zealand. They're back home. They're going to have a full home and away season. And some may say that would be good for them. They're going to be back in front of their fans. But then, as I was thinking more, the hardest thing I think for Wellington Phoenix is the travel. The amount of extra travel they'll have to do going from Wellington to Australia is going to really add up. And I think it's going to be a difficult thing to adjust to because they've become so used to being based in Sydney, down in Wollongong. They've become so accustomed to that where they literally just drive up the road for most of their games to Sydney, or having 1 hour flight south to Melbourne, or 1 hour flight up north to Brisbane for their games, that all of a sudden the 2-3 hour flights, they're going to start to add up. And I think they're going to actually have quite a down year this year, even though they're going to, I'd say, perform very well at home. They'll get some good results at home, but all their away games, I think they will really struggle for results in as the mileage really ticks up and they have to readjust as a squad to that.
Interesting shout. I too have Wellington Phoenix in 10th. I think for similar reasons as you there. I think Wellington are one of those teams where when they're on, it makes the A-League a lot more exciting.
Yeah.
And not to say that if they're not playing well, then the A-League will be a write-off this season. But
too many people say that about too many teams in the A-League.
And this is the thing. I should have addressed this at the beginning. I truly feel like the A-League is unpredictable until week 7. And then you go, oh, okay, now I see how the season's going to play out. But there's just so many anomalies in this league. It's kind of why I love it. But, yeah, it's an interesting one for Wellington. I think a player that I'm interested in seeing in is Nick Pennington. He, born in Italy, was brought up in and around the Italian system and now is back in Australia or back in New Zealand. Will he ever play for the Socceroos? I don't know. But when you're looking at Australian players within that Wellington Phoenix side, there's not really many to pick from.
No.
You've got Ugarkovic, who is maybe the other one, but
yeah.
Well,
the player I've gone for is my one to watch. He's not Australian. He's not a Kiwi. He's actually a full international. And that is, apologies if I get this wrong if you're watching, Botidar Kraev. He's joined from Midtjylland. He's a full international. And I think he's going to be a very impressive player for them. He has a vast array of experience. He is coming to the peak of his powers. I believe he's turning 25. And for a full international to be coming into the A-League at the age of 25, really entering the peak of their powers, is something that we don't usually see. We usually see it towards the end of their either international careers or at the end of their club careers. But I think this is going to be a phenomenal move. He's a great attacking midfielder. He's a natural 10, and he's going to take risks. So it'll be really exciting, I think, to watch Wellington play with him because he's going to create chances. That much is for sure. It's a matter of will those chances be taken? And we could see some huge variance goal lines for Wellington this season, which is part of the reason why I had them down in 10th, because I think they lack the stability to be consistent, really, in their attacking output because of just the lack of ability in the base of their midfield, which I'm sure Wellington fans, you're probably hoping Ugarkovic can bring that.
Should we move on to your 9th place team?
Let's see if we stay on the same train of thought. I've gone for Western Sydney Wanderers.
Wow. I also have gone for Western Sydney Wanderers as well. Why do you think that they're going to be finishing in 9th position?
I think they'll have a strong end to the season. I think the start of the season is going to be tricky, though. So many moving parts, right? Pretty much a new manager in Radard who has, let's say, an explosive personality. He wants success and he will rotate players until he finds that success. But you have a bunch of new players coming into it. Like their inter list, it's ridiculously long. So for my one to watch, it was difficult to choose. I could have easily gone for, one of the big names like a Brandon Borrello, right? But I've instead gone for someone that may have gone under the radar. I think he'll have a very good season in one of the most important positions in the A-League, which is fullback. I've gone for Gabriel Kleur, who has joined from Virtus Entella in the, I think it's Serie C, Italian third division.
You know more than me about that sort of thing. I don't even know how that team is pronounced. But yes, as you correctly say, there's a whole lot of ins for Western Sydney Wanderers. You've got Lawrence Thomas coming over from Sonderjurski. You've got Cassini Yengi. You've got Bazanic. You've got Gabriel Kleur.
Bazanic will be an interesting one. I'm really interested to see how he goes because he hasn't played much last year after a bit of a interesting contract situation. So I think he is also going to be a really interesting one to see how he goes.
Yeah, exactly. Even Ninkovic, I'll be fascinated to see how he goes because he's really at the tail end of his career. He's said some very strong words about Sydney FC making the move over. And then Brandon Borrello is another one that moving back over from Dresden. I've said this about most people already, but this is a really great opportunity for him to show that he still is within that Socceroo's frame. We've seen him in and around the squad within the last, I guess, this current World Cup qualifying. Whether I don't recall him really making any meaningful minutes. In fact, there was a video that the Socceroos posted where he was giving a shirt back to one of his family members, but just to make sure it was match worn, he kind of made a dive in on the grass to really dirty it up. But we identified in the latest podcast episode that our options on the wing for the Socceroos are a little bit slim, especially when you're looking at a winger with some pace to them. Brandon Borrello, this is an opportunity for him to show that, hey, I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. I want to be playing for the Socceroos.
My prediction for Borrello, I think you look at his career trajectory. Started off, really exploding his career in Brisbane, right? Good player for Brisbane. Had to move overseas. It's all right in patches, then didn't really work out. And now he's back in Australia. I think he's going to follow a similar trajectory to a player that followed a very similar path. Jamie McLaren really came onto the scene in Brisbane, move overseas, patchy good, didn't really work out. Back in Australia, Golden Boot winner. I think Borrello is going to become really impactful as an A-League player. But my big hope for Borrello is I think he has the ability and the confidence, I would say, to take the next step. I don't think he'll be comfortable in the A-League. I think he'll want to earn a move back to Europe or maybe to a league like the MLS where it will really suit his play style.
The last player from the Wanderers that I would highlight is Cassini Yengi, the brother of Tete Yengi.
Great player.
An incredible striker.
Big body.
Big body. He will be leading the line for the Wanderers, and I'm excited to see that partnership between Borrello and Yengi and see how many goals they can rack up between the two of them.
Yengi was really having a breakout season for Adelaide as well before he tore his quad, so it'll be interesting to see how he bounces back from that. Well, moving up to 8th, let's see if we stay in agreement.
Yep.
I'm wearing the kit, mate. Brisbane Roar.
Brisbane Roar. I haven't gone for Brisbane.
Wow.
And this might be a little bit of my Brisbane bias, but I've gone for Sydney FC.
Wow.
In 8th position. I don't think they've done enough, to be honest, to shake up the issues that they were having last season. I think having Bratton back in that squad will be big. They
for sure
really missed him last season. I think signing Lolly, great signing, but I still see some big issues within that Sydney FC side, and I can't see them remedied. I actually think that Corica is going to be sacked this season.
Interesting. Well, that is going to be an interesting one to see. The reason I've gone Brisbane, mate, is I think they will take strides. I don't think they'll take quite as lengthy strides as you may have them as. But I still view a significant weakness for Brisbane currently down this right-hand flank. I think when you look at someone like a Henry Hoare, who will be playing on the left, he has an ability to track back. But down the right, probably going to be Armiento. I don't know if he has the ability to track back and really help out what looks to be a back three brewing. So that's really my big thing for Brisbane. I think they'll be scoring goals, but my worry is, will we have the game management to really see out games? And that's not a knock on Warren Moon. I think that's more of a inexperienced players. So it's going to be a lot of pressure on a Tommy Aldred to really lead that defense and shore it up because it is a young defense, right? Kai Truan, he's been playing a little bit in midfield, but we'll probably see him in defense. Courtney Perkins returning. And even a Colin Chapman, who is probably more experienced in the midfield. It'll be interesting to see how he gets on with the Tommy Aldred. And I think Brisbane could surprise some people, but I think they'll just drop some points here and there and will just drop down the table despite playing some better football this year.
Yeah, I have Brisbane in 7th, and I don't think it's going to be an absolutely big margin between Sydney and Brisbane. I think it could even come down to goal difference based on my rankings. And really, that's if everything goes right for Brisbane this season. I don't see us making the finals at this point in time. I think this season is a rebuilding season, an opportunity for Warren Moon to go, hey, we've got something brewing here.
Yeah.
We're building something. You have the faithful few were right to back me and right to show their support for me. I don't think we're going to make the finals. Whether that will mean the end of Warren Moon's tenure, I don't know what the expectations that the board have given him. That back three will be interesting to see how that plays out. You've got the likes of Neville, Aldred, Truan, and Courtney Perkins, who can all play down in that back. You've also got Chapman, who he's been trialling down there. I was at their open training session, and Truan was playing in midfield. And that is something that I know he's done in the past.
In his youth career, really.
But in a two-man midfield, that second midfielder who's working off Jay O'Shea has to work incredibly hard. And I think that's probably one of the downfalls of Akbari when you're playing in that two-man midfield. I don't think he's worked super well. So I'll be fascinated to see how that goes. I agree with you. There are some weaknesses in the side. I still think a solid wing-back or a midfield option, wide midfield, if that's what you want to call it, is required. At the Raw, you've got Brindle South and Hingett, who are probably going to be playing on that right-hand side, or Zabala. And then on the left-hand side, you've got Armiento, who's moved in from Perth. You've got the likes of Brindle South, who once again can play on the left-hand side as well as the right. I think Moon will use him as a utility. And then Jordan Courtney Perkins. And I wonder whether we'll also see Henry Hoare be used out in that really wide position, especially when you look at the likes of Knowles, who's been brought in. I know he's a striker, but Moon might want to use him in one of those inside forward sort of roles that he's been looking at.
Well, even just watching him play for Oakley, he's an adept dribbler. He wants to take on his man. And Moon definitely, I think, values that more from a winger perspective as opposed to a striker who, of course, now is Charlie Austin, my one to watch.
There you go. Charlie Austin, one to watch. Yeah, for me, Truan, Courtney Perkins, and Hoare. We've seen what they can do in the A-League. And it'll be on them, I think, really, to step up because this Warren Moon Brisbane Royal side is quite a youthful one. And funnily enough, Kai Truan was the youngest player with the most number of minutes or some sort of stat like that I saw where a player under 20 getting lots of minutes last season. So he's got A-League experience.
He's got to make it count this year, though.
Exactly.
I'm really excited as well to see JCP back.
Jordan Courtney Perkins, friend of the show, I should also say. So
hopefully see him playing Saturday.
Exactly.
I mean, I'll be there.
You got me there.
You'll be off camping, mate, I've heard.
Yeah. It was a camping trip that was booked in ages ago. Couldn't be moved. And then the A-League were like, oh, sorry, we're going to start the A-League season this weekend.
Jeez.
So
We need to get in touch with the A-League and tell them to make sure to check with your schedule in the future.
They really should. Hey, who do you have in 7th?
I've gone for the Central Coast Mariners.
Okay.
I think losing Kai Rolls is a huge loss, as well as losing Miller on the right-hand side. The defense in a bit of a, it's really a rebuild, right, in that defensive lot. And I'm just not sure how that's going to shape up. I think there's going to be a huge focus on Grant Quall as well now, and it'll be a really difficult man management job for Nick Montgomery. I think they're going to have a slight fall off. I think the results are going to be decent, but I think they're just going to slip out of the final spots this year and have a very good season in 7th. I think there's going to be a big difference between 7th and 8th this year, though. In terms of ones to watch for me, it's Thomas Aquilina. I would say he's the best defensive option to come out of the Western Sydney's academy in my recent memory. I think he is a very poised player. He's not really the attacking fullback that Miller is, but he's very composed. He will contribute to build-up play, and I'm really excited to see the balance of him and Farrell because they're both very similar in that regard. They're composed, they're more supporting fullbacks, more of a throwback to the noughties, right? The 2000s, where you had these more composed supporting fullbacks kind of come up into your midfield in the wide positions to support in the build-up play. So I'm really interested to see how Montgomery balances that midfield with these two fullbacks, and I think Aquilina will have a very good season there.
I have Central Coast in 5th because I think that, yes, whilst their backline is definitely rebuilding, and once again, this could all change in the first 7 weeks of the league, but bringing in a player like Vukovic, once again, an experienced goalkeeper who knows what he's doing. They retain Dan Hall, who was partnered alongside Kai Rolls for a while. And then you've got the likes of Farrell, who was still ever present last season, left back. Aquilina, who's a fantastic right back option. I think that they're actually going to be a lot better in defense than maybe you fear. I could be wrong. That's the beauty of this thing. But it'll really depend on how well a player like Dan Hall can step up and really lead that backline, help lead that backline. Thankfully, they've got, like I said, a really experienced goalkeeper in Vukovic behind them. And we know the value of that as Brisbane fans, having an experienced goalkeeper like
Jamie Young.
Exactly.
I miss Jamie Young.
I do too. But yes, having an experienced goalkeeper can help with those shortcomings, I think. Those are the 3 players I think that I would highlight really is in that backline. Hall, Aquilina, and Farrell. As well, I don't know if it needs to be said, but Garang Kuol, he's here, at least at the Mariners, until the January transfer window. That's when he moves to Newcastle, and he'll be sent out on loan somewhere. Whether that's back to the A-League, I don't know if it's been confirmed yet where he's going on loan.
A lot of word about Portugal.
There you go. But if he can get Central Coast going alongside Jason Cummings, I think that they could have a really strong start to the season. Maybe some high-scoring matches as the defense starts to adjust, and then the attack is helping to create the goals. We could see some 4-3 scorelines maybe. But I think that Central Coast, if they start well, they can finish in a position like 5th.
Alrighty. I don't necessarily disagree with that. I think that the final spots are going to be tight. Moving on to that, though, the wooden spoon of the final spot, some may say, in 6th position. I've gone for the team that you have mentioned that I have not yet, Sydney FC.
Okay. Why is that?
I think when I look at Sydney, I think they have strengthened in all the right ways. I think the addition of someone like a Rodwell is going to actually have huge impacts on their build-up play especially. And that will combine with someone like a Luca Bratton who's returning from injury. So I really like their solidity in terms of their 2 lines in defence and in midfield. And to compound that, my one to watch, someone that's really gone under the radar, and I think maybe not on name recognition value, but in terms of talent, is up there with a Nanny, is up there with a Charlie Austin, Joe Lolly from Nottingham Forest. He's a fine forward. He's really technically gifted, and he has a wealth of experience really coming in pretty much at the peak of his powers. I think he's only just touched 30 from memory, so he's going to be really impactful, and him and Adam Lafondra will have a great partnership, I think, up in those forward lines.
Yeah, for me, I don't disagree with that. I had Sydney down lower, but I wonder whether there's just a lot of moving parts in that team that will take a little while to gel.
Okay.
And if it doesn't work out, then it could be ugly.
I think there's also a feel-good factor, though, for me around the club, right? They've just had this documentary released. They're moving back to their stadium. I think those will also play a big factor in that
This
season.
is true. The new stadium does look beautiful. So, Sydney, lots of question marks around them. But, yeah, we agree that they are within that mid-table. Just edging into the finals.
That realm.
Yeah.
Any young Australians that you think we should look out for?
For me, there's two that I think are worth looking out for in Sydney. I think it's fair to say that their side is a fair bit older. They've got some blood. They've got some young blood coming through. I'm interested to see how Pat Yazbek continues to go this season. He had a
fine footballer.
Great season last season. And it really is the case that for many of these young guys, they have a great A-League season, and it's whether they can back it up and show what they can do. We saw it with the likes of Atkinson and Metcalf. They have their sort of breakout season, and then they back it up the season after. Tilio, I think...
Stagnated a little bit, hasn't he?
Stagnated a tiny bit, but we'll get to him. Once again, opportunity for Yazbek to really stamp his spot in that Sydney FC side. The other one, a little bit controversial. I've gone for Heward Bell.
I like that.
When Redmayne was not having his best patch of form last season, Heward Bell came in, and I think he did a fine job considering the circumstances. And look, we know that Redmayne's going to go to the World Cup, but I think it would be fascinating if Heward Bell is the one that knocks him out of getting game time in the A-League. It won't happen, but it'd be one of those things that I'd love to see happen.
I really like Heward Bell. I think he's actually a really underappreciated shot stopper. I think he's a better shot stopper than Redmayne. Well, I'm not sure about Heward Bell as his sweeping capabilities. I think Corica wants to play an expansive style of football, right? He wants to have the ball. He wants to entertain the fans. He wants to play positive. He doesn't want to aggress the style of football that Sydney FC will become known for. So I think that's a big question mark over Heward Bell because he looked good last season when Sydney weren't good because he had more opportunities to show his shot-stopping ability and not necessarily show his sweeping ability. So that's the big question mark over his current ability, I think. But I agree with you. I think he probably is deserving of an A-League starting spot. When I look around the A-League and some goalkeepers, I think Heward Bell is better than some of them. So it'll be a really interesting season for him.
In sixth, I have Adelaide.
Ooh, okay. Well, I'll just go on to fifth then because I've got Adelaide.
Okay, so similar sort of position. Our top four, at least, sounds like it's the same four. We're not in the same order, but the top four, we've established that there's a
clear
tier.
four.
Yeah. Adelaide, I've got them in sixth. You've got them in fifth. What's your reasoning behind that?
When I looked at Adelaide, it's more so they're the best of the rest, I feel. I think there's a clear top four, and I think Adelaide are just very good, right? They're a very good side. I think Craig Goodwin returning is absolutely huge for them. I also think the addition of Harry van der Sarg will be very interesting. He's a talented footballer joining from Sydney FC. He'll slot right into that right back spot, which I think Javi Lopez, he's kind of at the tail ends of his career now. He'll start to get phased out, and we won't see him play as much, even though he's clearly technically one of the best players in the league. The legs are gone, right? I think that's fair to say. And what is he now, like 37, 38? I don't think that's unfair to say. So I think Van der Sarg will have a very good season with them. He's my one to watch, and I think that will be a really exciting thing for Australian football because Harry van der Sarg, he's probably the first modern kind of Australian centre-back, I would argue. And the reason I say centre-back is, even though he's going to probably play right back, is in terms of the back threes, right? He's going to be a player, I think, as he develops more and more, that will be a right centre-back, an undersized right centre-back. When you look around world football right now, players like Reece James, for example. He's a right back by trade, but where he excels tactically is playing as a right centre-back. And I think Harry van der Sarg will continue to progress as a footballer and become that in the Australian footballing scene. Don't know if he'll reach the heights of the Socceroos purely because of circumstance and managers and tendencies to play back threes, but I think he'll definitely become a very prominent figure in the Australian footballing landscape.
Great call. I think there are three players for me that are definitely ones to watch this season who all have futures with the Socceroos if they choose. Johnny Yule, you mentioned him last episode.
So good.
He's not a starter for Adelaide, but once again, like a lot of these other young players, an opportunity when he's on the pitch to show what he can do and to really play with authority. He's someone that we said it last episode on the pod. It's a bit of a make or break season for him. He's kind of getting to that age, at least we see in the A-League, where you start to see these players emerge and European and Asian teams start looking and going, oh, who are the players around 17, 18 that we can really keep an eye out for and then look to sign? And he's one of those sorts of players. So I'd love to see a big season from Johnny Yule. Iran Kunda.
Man amongst boys in the under-17 qualifiers.
And yes, that qualifier game against Mariana Islands, I think Mariana Islands have a population smaller than Shepparton, and it's only 50,000 people.
But even just watching him play amongst the other Joeys, like, he was clearly just the best player there by a country mile.
And when you look at his contributions to goal and minutes, he's actually on track to be better than Garang Kowal at this point in time. He's got a better goals or goal contribution to minute ratio than Kowal. And that's not a knock on Garang. It's just to say, hey, there's someone else that we should be looking out for. And it's necessary.
Newcastle United, you have another one maybe.
Maybe. How fun will that be in years to come looking at the Socceroos when you've got Garang Kowal and Nesri Irankunda on either wing, and then you've still got the likes of Marco Tilio or Arzani if he finds his form once again, adding a bit of creative flair out wide. It's going to be fun to watch. The last player, he's a younger brother in the same way that Garang Kowal is. It's Moussa Touré, younger brother of both Al Hassan and Mo Touré. Mo being over in France at the moment, Al Hassan at MacArthur. Whether we'll see him getting lots of game time, I don't know, but there's been shouts that he's the best of the Touré brothers.
Well, that's what the Touré brothers themselves have said.
So if he can get any game time this season and get a couple of goals to show for it, it'll be great for his development.
Exciting. Also featuring in round 1.
There you
Adelaide.
go.
He's on the match card. You know, that they've confirmed that. He's off to the travelling party. So after this video, make sure you watch our round 1 preview and you'll hear our thoughts about maybe how Moussa Touré would go.
There you go. Big tease for an episode that we haven't recorded just yet, but we'll see how we go.
That's what I do. Let's move on to the top 4 though, right?
Yeah.
Like, there's clearly a top 4.
Yes.
And for me in 4th, this was a tricky one that I worry about their attack. And when I say the team, you'll be probably shocked maybe. And I'm sure you listeners at home, you'll probably also be shocked.
The listeners who are watching this video.
Exactly, yes. It's Melbourne City.
Okay.
And the reason I worry for the attack is people often speak about the A-League and say there is a need to innovate, right? When teams don't improve, when they don't innovate, when they don't change their team, their identity, and how they play football, they stagnate, they fall. And that's often attributed to why teams struggle to be perennial teams, right? And do the double, for example, and win twice in a row. Only the Raw, I think, have won twice in a row, right?
Yeah, but they didn't even do... Are we talking about... It's a bit of a philosophy. Are we talking about grand finals or are we talking about the A-League regular season?
I was more so alluding to the regular season.
The Raw haven't done a back-to-back regular season.
Yeah, they did the
grand
final.
Grand finals.
And I still think they're only grand final winners to do it twice, right?
Sydney FC.
They did as well. Okay, well, there you go. I am
It's a bit
mistaken.
of Brisbane bias from you.
Always, mate. Always. But I think when you look at lack of innovation, people often look to the midfield. I also look to the attack. And towards the end of the season, I think there are big question marks over the Melbourne City attack. McLaren, he's a poacher, right? He's not really creating anything for himself. So once his service shores up, I mean, he's not really as impactful. Lecky really started struggling. In fact, we saw Lecky move into the midfield so much he was struggling out in the wing, right? Naboo, he's a hot and cold player right now at this point in his career, and he was having a cold streak. And then Tilio was struggling with all the added attention on him because the other players in the build-up, you know, McLaren's not offering much. Naboo is in a cold streak, so all the attention then is on shutting down Tilio, and he struggled with all the extra attention. So I worry about the Melbourne City attack, and I think they're actually going to struggle this season a bit for goals. That's not to say McLaren isn't going to score, potentially a golden boot amount. I'm just saying that we'll see a lot of maybe 2-1 losses or 1-1 draws for Melbourne City, and they won't be able to get over the line and secure enough wins really to win the league or to get higher up this table.
Just to fact check you quickly, Sydney FC did the back-to-back, at least for end of season on the ladder. Sydney FC did the back-to-back premiers, which is being at top at the end of the season, 2016-17 and 2017-18, and then Melbourne City over the last 2 seasons have been the premiers as well. So 2 clubs have done that, and then 2 clubs have become the grand final back-to-back winners, being Sydney FC and Brisbane Roar. But on Melbourne City, I can see where you're coming from. I don't have them in the top 2. I've got them in 3rd.
Yeah.
I think, like you say, there's going to be a heavy emphasis on that front 3 who are all in and around that Socceroo squad. Naboo, Leckie, and Jamie McLaren. Heavy emphasis on them last season as well, and they delivered. They didn't deliver the grand final, but they delivered at least throughout the regular season. But as you say, Matt Leckie was moved into midfield halfway through the season because he has lost that pace. He has lost that ability to really beat his man, which is why it confuses me that Arnold is sticking with him as a right winger, because if he's lost it in the A-League, coming up against better opposition, you'd think it would make more sense to play him where his strengths are, at least in this point, at least at this point in his career.
Trying to understand Graham Arnold decision making can sometimes be a bit of a rabbit hole, mate.
It can be. So I think, like we've said, Tilio, it's a massive opportunity for him to show what he can do this season. He may be feeling a little bit of pressure off the back of that New Zealand game. I don't think having 1 miss is enough to kick him off the plane, but he'll definitely be feeling the pressure.
It was a miss, though.
It was a miss, and it really should have been a goal. But it's really his season. It's a make or break for him to show that, hey, I've still got it. I'm still Australia's next wonder kid, or one of Australia's next wonder kids. Don't write me off. And I would hate to write him off even now, because I think he does have bags of potential and bags of skill. Whether, because Norbo gives him that opportunity to show what he can do, give him some more 90-minute games, I don't know. But he really needs to take ownership this season and really take this opportunity and really take this opportunity to be one of the leading players at Melbourne City.
For sure. Something that being made a big deal of at Melbourne City, rightfully so, is the departure of Connor Metcalf. So for me, the big player to watch for Melbourne City is the replacement in that midfield, Richard van der Venne. He's joined from the Eredivisie side, RKC Waalwijk. I'm not sure. Sorry, any Dutch viewers out there. I'm doing my best, but I think he's going to be probably the one to watch. Whether that's because it's going to be a positive thing or a negative thing, we will see. I think it will be a positive thing in the end. He'll take some time to acclimatize, because when I think of other Dutch players that have transferred to the A-League, it always takes a little bit of time to adjust and to really get used to the additional physicality and especially the heat of an A-League season.
I would say RKC Waalwijk is how I would pronounce that. But once again, I'm not Dutch. I have a sister-in-law who is. Maybe I'll get her on the phone next time we record for any Dutch pronunciations. For me, the 2 players other than Tilio that I think, for me, there are 3 other players that I would like to see have great seasons in the A-League, at least for the sake of the national team. Curtis Good, left-sided centre-back. He's getting towards the point where he's in his late 20s and really hitting the peak of his career, at least skill-wise. We see centre-backs peaking maybe a little bit later on, as in their early 30s. But for someone like him, Australia has struggled previously for centre-back options. I think we're starting to discover that actually we've got some pretty decent ones at our disposal. But for Curtis Good, a player who controversially last World Cup qualifier he wasn't on the initial 30 list. I can't quite remember what happened, but
there was injuries and it came out he wasn't even in the top 50 list.
That's right. I now remember. But one of those players that is in and around the fringes of the Socceroos, and I would love to see him play more games because I think his skill, where he's at skill-wise, is at a level where he could be a Socceroo, but we haven't quite seen that yet. And I think this will be a really great season and a great opportunity to remind Australia what he can do, the skill set that he has. He's got someone like Thomas Glover, who had a bit of a shaky season last season, playing behind him in goals. And this is really his opportunity to step up in that defensive line and say, hey, let's keep some more clean sheets.
Yep.
So for me, he's number one that I'd like to see have a good season. Jordan Boss, a player that we saw start to break through last season. I think as many of these other players that we've mentioned before, I would like to see him get more minutes this season. And I don't think he'll be taking a starting spot off Jamison, but if he can, I don't think we'll see him taking a starting spot off Jamison, but if he can really show what he can do when he's on the pitch, when he's brought on in the 60th minute, the 70th minute, and get some goal contributions, because we know that the way that City play, they like to get their fullbacks involved in the play. Contribute to some goals, get some assists. It'll be a really big confidence booster for him and a real big confidence booster, I think, for this Melbourne City side, who I don't think will make that top two. The last player that is going to need to have a big season for them is, I think, Aidan O'Neill.
Yeah.
A player that has been in and around the A-League for a little while. He was at a Premier League side, Burnley, I believe.
Correct.
You actually know him personally. I think you got into a scrap back in the day at Brisbane Boys College.
Look, I will need to confirm nor deny such activities.
Sure. That's a nice way of keeping your record clean. But he's a player in this Melbourne City side who is bringing some youth to that midfield. You had Metcalf last season. You had O'Neill in there. I don't know whether we'll see Aidan O'Neill playing for the Socceroos anytime soon, but I get this gut feeling that even though he's not the same player as Moy, he could be the type of player that is a late bloomer in his career, and maybe we'll see some dominance from him this season.
Certainly is a season for him to really prove the kind of player he could be, especially stepping up, potentially being a bit more of a creative outlet for the Melbourne City side. Well, staying in the same city for me in third place, in fact, staying in the same stadium, this could be one of two teams. It's Melbourne Victory, mate. I've gone for Melbourne Victory, just getting past Melbourne City and finishing third.
There you go. Melbourne Victory. That's interesting because I've got them as my number one.
Wow.
I think that they have a really good vibe around their team this year. I think Brimmer had a standout season last season and he'll be looking to replicate that again this season. I think that Popovic is one of the best managers in Australia, and I think he'll want to take them one step further because last year I believe they finished in second. He'll want to take them one step further and hopefully finish in first for them. They've got players like Ben Falami, who has played one game for the Socceroos, Chris Economides, who
struggled last season.
Struggled last season, but I think we're going to see a lot more of him this season. I think that they have the ability to win the comp this season.
Okay. For me, I think it's going to be a bit of a regression to the mean, almost for them. I think a lot of players overperformed their abilities. When I say that, I think of players like D'Agostino. I think he vastly overperformed based on what his actual technical and footballing ability is. Even a player like Brimmer, I would argue, I think he slightly overperformed who he is, and I think that is not a knock on him, but is more so a compliment on Popovic as the coach. I think Popovic has consistently, wherever he has gone in Australian football, has gotten far more out of his players than what other managers would. And something we also see with Popovic is after a big, grueling season, is the players can regress a little bit and they struggle. And I think that's what we may see this season. I think D'Agostino, Brimmer will regress. Even out wide, I think Valami will regress a tiny little bit. I think he'll meet similar standards this season, Valami, but at his age, you kind of expect him to improve. So I'd argue meeting the standards is probably a regression in terms of what you expect. But out wide, they do have Nani now, right? And it looks like he's going to be a very competitive player. Often we see those kind of players kind of have a holiday in the A-League. But Nani, like Charlie Austin, look to be all about it and taking this very seriously. So I'm very excited to see him. I think he's one to watch. But unfortunately for Victory fans, if you take my opinion seriously, I'm sorry. I think you're just going to regress a little bit this season and have a few more worries.
James, you've just now pissed off all the Victory fans that did listen to the show. They're now not going to listen to the show, not going to watch any of our videos.
Oh, no.
I think that third would be a great season for Victory. I just look at players like Nani, players like Tommy Urich, who I think still can do a great job in the A-League as that bigger body up front. As that bigger body up front, you've got the likes of Broxham, who still does a job, Josh Brillante, Jake Brimmer. You've got even bringing in a player like Eli Adams, who I don't think will see a lot of game time, but he brought a spark whenever he came on when he was at Brisbane. I don't think he's going to move the needle necessarily. But Roderick Miranda, Matt Sporanovic, Jason Guerrier, all players that are in the top 10%, I think, of A-League players when you look at where they are in their positions.
Okay, well, part of the reason I have Victory down on third is because I think one team in particular has significantly improved and come on leaps and bounds, and that's MacArthur. I have MacArthur in second, particularly because of, well, Dwight York, I think, is doing a phenomenal job, but also the signing of Arzani, I think, is going to be absolutely huge for them, and he's my one to watch.
You have MacArthur in second, did you say?
I do.
I have MacArthur in second as well, which means that I've got Western United in fourth.
All right. Well, obviously, I've got Western United in first, but before we get on to that, let's focus on MacArthur.
Yep.
I think York doing a really good job, and I think Arzani is going to be huge for them. And when I look in and around the MacArthur setup, I think they've got a really good vibe going on, and I think we're going to see an absolutely incredible campaign from Ulysses De Vere. I think he's probably my Johnny Warren favorite at the moment. I think he's going to have an insane season. He's going to dominate the league, and then you have Arzani and Alassane Toure really shoring up the wings, creating plenty of opportunities for players like Rose to finish in the middle. I think they're going to just be scoring goals for days. Then you think about, the defense. Well, you still have phenomenal footballers down there. And a player even like Susnia, who is one of my favorite players in the A-League right now. He is a phenomenal left-footed centre-back. And I think under a Dwight York, where he has more responsibility and more of a burden, he will shine more. I think he's one of those players where if he's asked to step up and do more, he will step up and do more, and will be better for it. And then even back between the sticks, good goalie as well. So I think MacArthur going to have a very good season, and it was a really big tussle for me between them and Western United for first place. But ultimately, I think the start of the season for MacArthur, I think, is going to be good. I think the end of the season is going to be phenomenal. I think they're going to have a little bit of a mid-season kind of bump in form, which at the end of the day is the reason I've got them in second.
yeah, looking through this squad, you've highlighted players that I also think are fantastic and opportunity for them to really show what they can do. We've seen it even in the Australia Cup. You could argue that that's, 6 or 7 games that you have to win in a row, which is impressive, don't get me wrong, but can they do it over a full season? And I think they can. I think that Dwight Yorke has been a really great appointment by MacArthur. I think having young attacking players like De Silva, who I know has dropped in to play in a midfield position.
Didn't even mention De Silva.
Exactly.
Stack squad.
You've got De Silva, Al Hassan Toure, Daniel Arzani, even Anthony Carter, who is a player who's been brought back over from Europe. I think he's in his mid-20s, mid to late 20s now. But was one of these players a number of years ago that was touted as being the next big thing in Australian football. And I'm sure he isn't back just for a holiday. He'll want to show that, hey, you had the right to back me as one of the next big things in Australian football. And depending on how he goes, we could see him involved in this next World Cup cycle. So you've got just an absolute wealth of talent in that side. One of the greatest strikers that the Premier League has seen in Dwight Yorke, helping to coach them, helping to guide them, helping them to become better creative players. And then you look at the likes of Kurto, who's just an anchor in goal. You've got Sushnar, as you've mentioned as well, who's a gun down back. I can see them doing very well in the A-League this season. It just depends on whether they can keep up the consistency. But that's why I've got them in second position. I think they've got a very talented squad. I'll be really interested to see how things pan out with this MacArthur side.
It is going to be interesting. And moving on to Western United, right? I've got them first. Where did you have them?
Fourth.
Did you fourth? Yeah. I think that's a bit of a disservice, if I'm to be honest, because when I look at Western United, I honestly believe, when I look at this squad, that they have the best centre-back I've ever seen play in the A-League. Leo Lacroix is insane. He is so good. The size, the speed, the technical ability to read the ball, get an interception, and then play a beautiful forward pass to really retool the attack. The set-piece threat he is as well. And when I say set-piece threat, move to the striker, who I think is probably the best I've seen in a decade play in the A-League, in Prjovic. Phenomenal striker. Honestly, keeping him is as big as signing a nanny, right? He is just so good, right? He contributes in all phases of play. He tracks back defensively. He pretty much nullifies all set-piece threats from the opposition, and then is a set-piece beast at the other end. And when you then have Garuccio and Risden ripping in crosses to them, it's just such a beautifully balanced squad, beautifully designed to be, well, winning, right? The way that Aloisi has structured this side is to win. And then there's been a bit of a fuss about, okay, well, they haven't made many signings. Someone like a James Troisi, I think, has gone incredibly under the radar. Just, he had a hard season at Western Sydney. He struggled. He had a great start, but after that struggled, as Western Sydney were in turmoil once again. And I think coming into the midfield, him, and also a Diamante who is returning from injury, looks healthy and ready to go. Two creative players that get in half space will wreak havoc because so much attention is drawn into the middle from the big number 9, and then you have the overlapping fullbacks out wide. I think honestly, I would go as far as to say that this version of Western United could be the best A-League team we ever see.
Wow.
I think it'll be up there with Barcelona in terms of how dominant it is, which hurts because obviously it's John Aloisi at the helm as well, who is at the Raw. So as a Raw fan, that hurts. But I mean, when I look at the talent, when I look at the balance of the squad, I honestly think they'll be pretty much untouchable this year.
There you go. I disagree with you on a couple of things. I think that I have no qualms over John Aloisi. Yes, he didn't have a wonderful tenure at the Raw. I don't think it worked out, but I think after his time at the Raw, he went away and he learned a number of things.
Yeah, for sure.
And he's grown as a manager, and I think it's
clear.
I think that's what you can ask of a manager, to grow and become better, and he's done that. I worry about the age of this squad.
Okay.
They're the second oldest squad in the A-League behind Sydney FC. you've got players, don't get me wrong, at their peak of their power, and age is just a number. But I wonder whether playing the style of football that Aloisi wants to play, whether there's just, I don't know, it's not as bad as his season where he signed Massimo Maccarone and Maccarone was just a traffic cone. He didn't really do much up top. But when you look at the players coming through, and maybe this is just a personal stylistic thing, I like seeing young players bled into a team. I don't see a lot of that. You got Neil Kilkenny, who's in that midfield with Diamante, James Troisi as well, who are all in their 30s, I believe. Yeah.
Yep. And we even saw Torbo Stanley play a bit of midfield last year.
So when you look at that midfield, you've got Neil Kilkenny, Stephen Lustica, James Troisi, and Diamante, who are all in their 30s now. You then look at their backline, Lacroix, incredible. And I guess as a centre-back, you can be in your 30s and it's pretty comfortable. Topple Stanley as well, who's getting up there in age. Jamie Young, who is, I think, the best goalkeeper
in the league.
So age doesn't really
matter. I'd argue
there.
It's not really close either.
Yeah, it's true. I just worry that this team might run out of legs at some point.
Okay.
And that might be the downfall of the side, a reliance too much on experience, which it did well for them last season. And I think, as you say, plenty of great players, but just one or two injuries to some of those older guys. And I wonder whether that'll just shake up the squad too much.
When I look at Western United, mate, and I look at who they are, how they play, and I straight away, my mind at least goes to, have we seen something like this before? And my mind goes to Jose Mourinho's Chelsea sides. Obviously, they're not nearly as good, but when I think about those sides, you had them have a really good, season. They win the league, they look dominant. And then everyone's like, oh, they can't back that up. They're all old. There's not much, they're experienced, but I just don't know if they can keep that up, keep it going, let alone improve with a target on their back and everyone chasing. And then what do? They back it up and they do it even better. Then they have this third season blues after that. Everyone's like, oh, they're going to keep on going. They're just going to storm the league for years to come. And then there's this big third season blues where they fall apart and really struggle. And I wouldn't be surprised because I think there's a lot of similarities between kind of the stylistic approach of a Jose Mourinho Chelsea side and a John Aloisi Western United side. They both rely on a similar kind of things: defensive solidity, set-piece proficiency, and ability to control phases of play. And obviously, a huge reliance on experience. So I wouldn't be surprised to see Western Sydney have an insane year this year, one of the best we've seen, even better than last year, and then kind of just fall off a cliff next year. I wouldn't be surprised to see that. And I think the similarities are just so glaringly personally. But I can also see a fourth place happening. I can see that. I can see the realm possibility. Well, with that, I think we're all up for time. This is a cracker of an episode. If you stayed till the end, thank you very much. I hope you did enjoy. Make sure you like, subscribe. Get over to the podcast. Link down below. We have fun there, mate, don't we?
Yeah, podcast is different to what we're doing here, at least for this episode. Podcast is looking more specifically at Socceroo's players and fringe Socceroo's players and future Socceroo's players and breaking down who's doing well, who maybe should improve. So if you enjoy our analysis, maybe you didn't enjoy our analysis, but you want to give us a second chance, then check out the podcast. We're on all platforms. So Soccerwhos Pod, thanks so much for watching.
Thank you, and let us know who your champion favourites are. Let's go. Let us know in the comment section. Champion favourites, Golden Boot favourite. I want to hear that. That'll be interesting. Toodaloo. Goodbye.
See ya.